which is a huge part of what trying to get people to look at when I talk about conscious design is you have to look at the life cycle. You can't, there's a lot of focus on, well, let's pick a good material and let's design it, and then not thinking about, well, what happens when the end of life of product, and even having the conversation of, do you make it repairable? Do you make it serviceable? Do you make it recyclable? Do you make it biodegradable? And really, there's actually a lot of options at the end of life. It just doesn't always get thought about.
This is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. This is your host, Neil Collins. It is a show that is supported by our work at Latitude Realty. In it, we explore our natural and built environments and how they can be used as a force for good. The show sets out to inspire impactful ideas, meaningful change, human wellness, and ecological restoration through interviews and easy-to-digest conversations. Our guests range from industry leaders to iconoclasts, from both well-known figures to everyday people leading extraordinary lives. This is a show for people looking for education and inspiration on how real estate can be done differently. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. I'm excited about our conversation today because I have Ian Peterman with me, and we're really going to get into first a category that I'm really interested in, which is conscious design. And to get into the backstory here, I want to put out front that I don't think that Ian is a real estate expert, but maybe you are. We just don't know about it. But design is so important because the world that we get is the world that we design for. And whenever I was Googling around the internet, I came across Ian's work, and I was just so impressed about the ability to weave in sustainability and ethics into designs, not just from products, but to services and applications. So Ian, welcome to the show. Why don't you just introduce yourself to it, and maybe let's start at the beginning of where you came from and how you got into your design work.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. This is always great to share what we're doing, and especially as to see how this connection with conscious, real estate, and how that is something you're working on, which is great. So going back to kind of to where I started, I grew up around design. My father was a designer, and so that kind of piqued my interest at a young age. And then I kind of took off running with it. I really loved it. I wanted to work for him, so I ended up being able to learn how to do drafting when I was 12, because I just really enjoyed it. And I got an internship when I was 16 at a company designing lasers, and so that I really grew from there. I gained a lot of experience. We got really immersed in not just, how do you make a little 3D model, but, well, how do you actually get it made? How are we going to produce it? We're going to test it. It's very, very much getting to understand the entire process and life cycle of a product. And from there, I moved on to working for HP for a while. I helped a company called Barefoot Sound. They make studio monitors. I was their lead designer for a number of years, taking them from just a couple products to an entire product line and experiencing the whole, hey, we have an idea for a speaker. Now it's in production. Now it's being sold. Now there's pictures of different artists standing next to the speakers that we designed, and getting to experience that whole process. And I've through that I've learned the entire process. I've understand the nuts and bolts of it. And in school, there's things like human-centered design and what that means. How do you design things for people? But one of the things that I kind of realized through my career is there's a lot of focus on the ergonomics, right? It's basically human-centered design is ergonomics, and how do you feel about the product? But there's another layer. There's more layers to that, and that's kind of how I got into what are those layers? How do we design not just for the individual user who happens to be touching the product, but how do we think about the impact on society, on the company, on the employees? How do we look at the ecological impacts of a product? And as consumers become more and more interested in those things, I wanted to create a way of thinking and start putting out those questions. Well, how do we think about these things, not retroactively, not in a, oh well, just don't buy that product, but how do we from the ground zero design a product and a brand or a service around thinking about those questions? And that's what I'm doing now. Is I wrote a book about it, and now I'm trying to get as many people on board as possible, and get people's feedback and thoughts on it. How do we create really consciously thought about products? How do we do that in an efficient way? And uh, it's been a great response. People, I don't really talk to anybody that goes, "Oh, that's a terrible idea." Every everyone says, "Oh, that's great. We would love to see more of that. We'd love to be interested in that." And so it's been exciting to see, you know, that people are ready for it and want it, and it's not too early. To nobody's ignoring it. So yeah,
When did
so
you stumble into, or what's the genesis behind the term conscious design? Is that something that you had coined, or are you going off of lineage of somebody else?
um it's something that I came up kind of isolated, um, and it's just it honestly came about from conversations with other people. I've talked with my wife about it. She was a huge influence in this, and it came about as well. How do you describe? Because the biggest thing is how do we need to be aware. If you're not aware of the impacts, you can't do anything about it. So what is the most succinct way to describe becoming more aware? And consciousness is, it is what you're aware of. If you're not aware of it, you can't be conscious of it. So that then became the word that we found that was the most encapsulating of how do we say in just a couple words that we're going to be aware of all of the different impacts that a product has and think about it and then create something with that. And so conscious design is what I came up with as a way to encapsulate that in a short short form. And then after I put that out, we came up with that. Then I started doing some searches, and there's actually a organization that they say conscious design, but they're architecture based. So, and I've actually interviewed one of their members, and I think there's a lot of great potential synergy with them, but their focus is the architecture side. And so it's a nice, um, it was nice to be kind of validated because there's a whole group of people over here saying we need to have conscious design towards architecture. And then I feel like I'm over here going, yes, and there's other areas, so we need to do that too. Architecture is great, and let's spread that to other areas. And so that's my that's what we're taking conscious design is products and more of those, the non-buildings of the world that we're going to design.
And that's where I want to really focus on the gap between the physical design of the built world and the products which we fill the built world with. And if because I think you have to take a holistic view of that, because when you look at how we inhabit our places and spaces, if anybody's ever moved, this is a great realization, is that you accumulate so much stuff in your life first of all, you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
A lot of plastic and metal, and you're just like, is this recyclable? Do I need to throw this away? It's not serving me anymore. But I have a house full of this stuff.
Right.
And then secondly is whenever you do move, you accumulate a lot of garbage in the process. We're all getting Amazon packages now. It's all coming with a ton of just like toxic crap. And maybe
Yeah.
it's not toxic. Maybe they're evolving faster than I know. But um, so I do think that this is a very relevant conversation to look at the built environment, because this is a real estate show. Um, and we have talked a couple of days ago, Ian, and I want to include people in on the conversation. But I'm hoping that you can help paint a picture of more of a trend line, because what we've seen is um, sustainability. People and firms, more specifically, have said, we're going to jeopardize our profits to
Mm.
do sustainable measures. But now it seems like we're entering into a different reality, and I'm hoping that you can shed some light on what you're seeing, because it seems like more of the marketplace is coming to you to for a conscious design approach.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I would have agreed with this statement. It's expensive to be green 10 years ago, but just in the last 5 years, there's so many new materials, there's so many new options and alternatives that people are developing that are either close to the same cost, so within 10 or 20%, or cheaper. And the other thing that, and it's really a lot of my conversation with people is helping them become aware. So there's a lot of call it coaching and teaching that goes along with, all right, we can do you want this product. Yes, we can actually do that in a more ecologically friendly way. We can do it in a way that is not super toxic. We can have here, here's a whole list of material options that we can go through, and it's really awareness, right? It's just one of those things that for such a long time, the we'll call it the oil-based material supply has been so um, bolstered and discounted that there was no way to compete with it. And now there's other materials that are able to, and we've put enough R&D time into developing those materials where you're not going to have a structural decay. There used to be some more plant-based plastics that they existed, but nobody really wanted them because they couldn't hold up. They're not as strong. They just couldn't do it. But now there's plastics being made out of all kinds of materials that are just as strong or stronger. There's other materials that we're looking at. I'm involved with a company that's working on hemp-based materials that people are just now exploring because we legalized industrial hemp again. And so there's these new materials that keep coming out that are competitive. They aren't behind. They aren't worse than existing materials. And so really then it becomes looking at, well, there's also the fact that people are willing to pay more. People are willing to pay a little bit more if it's a better material, if it's a better product. And so that tipping point, we've passed the tipping point where it makes sense. And I think that we're aiming right now as a global economy, or especially in the US and other countries that are thinking about this. Europe's another big one. uh, we're all looking at materials and products. We're basing our decisions on our buying on whether it's a good company, whether it's a good material. And I think we're seeing that because more and more of the startups that are coming out that have physical products are focused on, we give back to these charities, we give back to people, we give back to our community, we support the environment, we're reducing waste. And those trends are, I think, they're reaching an avalanche standpoint where if you're trying to not do those things, you're going to get knocked over and fall behind because everyone else is doing it. And so that is now creating that snowball effect which is allowing more money to be put into researching and developing more materials and more options and alternatives that are environmentally friendly. And so at this point, to not have at least part of your product, and I think the other thing is people are really, they're really daunted when you go, well, let's make your entire product eco-friendly, and they go, well, we have over 100 components, this is a lot of work, this is like you're trying to eat an elephant in one bite. It's just not, maybe you could do it, but it's going to be excruciatingly painful, and no one's going to enjoy it. And I think there's a lot of pressure people kind of put on themselves. Well, we have to make everything perfectly green and environmentally friendly on day one, or convert our whole product at once. And it's not the case. If you just keep, replace a part every 3 months, you're going to get there, right? So it's also helping people to understand that you can take out smaller smaller bites. You don't have to redesign everything all at once. You can go through that process. And so as more and more people are figuring that out and being aware that there's even those options, and then also being able to take them in steps rather than all at once, it's allowing more people to do that. And that's what we end up working with, people that are willing to at least take a couple steps, at the very least change your packaging, right? There's almost no need for plastic packaging anymore. um Maybe there's some argument for the medical world for single use kind of things, but even that, there's companies working on changing that already. So it's beginning to change quite a bit.
I can imagine that overhauling somebody's supply chain on at least on some products and some companies could take years. I mean,
Oh,
is that the
absolutely.
case?
Absolutely. I would give Apple as a great example of this, because they made an announcement, I want to say it's almost a decade ago now, where they said that they would reach 80% recyclability, or say they had some number that a decade ago everyone was like, you're not going to be able to do that. Like that's just not possible. And it took them 10 years, but they finally hit the number that they had said they would 10 years before. And so I use that example because Apple's a big company. They have a lot of money, right? They have the resources to do it. And if it took them 10 years to be able to do it in a smart business way, maybe they could have done it in 5, but still, all they did was they took one day at a time for 10 years, and then they hit that goal. And so it may take a little while if your supply chain is complex. And building an Apple product, that supply chain is a very deep supply chain to go through and be able to change and adjust. So it could take a long time, but at the end they were able to say, look, we said we were going to do it, and now we did it, and now our product is one of the most recyclable products made. So it becomes one of those, if you're willing to do it and you're in it to actually accomplish it, then it will take a while sometimes, but it will be possible. And it's becoming even more possible now. If they had, set that mission today, they probably would have been able to do it in just a couple of years, because there's more options, there's more opportunity to make those choices.
I'm glad you brought up Apple as an example of this, because I look at these really big companies, and I'll name a few as just maybe we can even dive into them. But um, IKEA has a brand image that they say we're a sustainable brand. Yet so often you find it's the furniture that like breaks down the fastest and ends up in the landfill the quickest. Um, and it's almost like there's a tension there of like, how are they making these claims, and are big companies able to drive that kind of change? Like Walmart said that they were going to be a regenerative company, as did Nestle. And Nestle is probably one of the most egregious environmentally degradative examples out there. But they have now said, we're selling off our plastic bottle company, we're selling off our candy bar company, we're switching to regenerative agriculture. And so I'm curious, like, how do these big companies how are they approaching design? And do you think that that's a way that we're going to create the kind of scale of change? Um, or do you see it being a lot of lip service?
Um, and I think it's both. I think it's one of those, without those huge companies changing, it's going to be very hard to move a needle. Because when you talk about, let's say, Coca-Cola, they sell some insane number, don't quote me on it, but it's like a billion bottles a day get used around the world, right? We're talking about around the world, a vast amount, right? So when we talk about, we want to reduce plastic, it's great that, the mom and pop store in the middle of Illinois is done with it and they're only using glass bottles. But we have entire corporations that produce more than anybody else. So that shift needs to happen. And I think one of the things that's happening now is that there has been a lot of lip service, like greenwashing definitely is a thing. It's been happening for a while. But I also think that at this point, consumers are more aware. There's a lot more social pressure from customers to make changes. And so there's some movement. And, you could always, like you said, if they're selling off the plastic bottle manufacturer, that means maybe they will technically be regenerative, but they're going to buy plastic bottle from another company that isn't. So then it kind of becomes, well, how deep does that change go, and where do we draw lines of defining, oh, we're a regenerative company? Well, what does that mean? Does that mean your supply chain is, or does that just mean you're a regenerative company? Because then technically you could be an office with a solar panel and have more that generates more power than you use, and you've done it. Like you've completed the mission. Your entity is technically regenerative, whereas the rest of your supply chain is not. So but I think that people are looking at that more because those conversations are happening, right? People are asking those kinds of questions, and there's a lot more startups that are growing quickly, that they have a, we're certified, our we have ethical practices, our supply chain has been certified. And so as that's gaining momentum, they're honestly taking market share. And we're taking, those startups are starting to take enough market share to where larger companies, unless they're blind, they're seeing a trend, right? But I would also point out that, like ExxonMobil and these giant oil companies also invest hundreds of millions of dollars into, solar panels and things like that. So it's quite possible. I hope that the change is real and that people are beginning to shift. But how long it will take to actually make that change, though, it's hard to say, and it's especially if there's still money in doing it the old way. It's one of those. It's hard to make the decision to make less money and to leave money on the table. Um, so I think that for them, it's going to be a very slow change unless something else big happens. If there's an even bigger shift in, consumer purchase, which is it basically guides a lot of how the big companies work. Is, well, if nobody's spending money on us, we need to change. So
And this is where I like the externalities that a company has created, either through there's no there's no plan for the product of where it goes once the useful life is up, or like the
mm,
packaging or whatever. Like, is this starting to shift in terms of uh, more manufacturers are thinking cradle to cradle, or do we still have a long way to go in that regard?
I'd say we still have a long way to go. There's a lot of I would say that there's some movement, right? There's more conversations happening, but again, it's mostly the smaller companies that are creating those products and saying ours is a cradle to cradle, or cradle to grave, but it's biodegradable. So it's those kinds of things are mostly the domain of small businesses, but there are some real and serious initiatives in larger companies and that are looking at, well, how do we do this on a mass scale, because it's also very much a different conversation when you're saying, well, I make 10,000 shoes a year, or you're Nike and you say we make billions of products every single year. It's a lot different conversation of how do you take in and recycle things. And there are programs, there's options out there, um, but it's also not, the life cycle is not quite as thought about still. It's something that even in design school, life cycle is one of those kind of, it's talked about, it's never really a focus. So it's just not focused on it. And when you don't focus on it on the educational level, that means it's only if you happen to care about it yourself and be at a place that will actually listen to you. And that combination is rare. And so it's a limited amount of effort really being put into life cycle, which is a huge part of what trying to get people to look at when I talk about conscious design is you have to look at the life cycle. You can't, there's a lot of focus on, well, let's pick a good material and let's design it, and then not thinking about, well, what happens when the end of life of product, and even having the conversation of, do you make it repairable, do you make it serviceable, do you make it recyclable, do you make it biodegradable? And really there's actually a lot of options at the end of life. It just doesn't always get thought about as much as it should. And and it also comes down to kind of the price point. So if it's something that's cheap, you're not gonna it's less likely for a company to spend the time thinking about, what are we gonna do with this thing when it's over, because it's small enough to fit in a trash can and it's not our problem. Whereas, larger things like, and more expensive, like a car, well, no one's going to spend 30, $40,000 on a car and not be able to repair it. Like, that's just not an option for people to invest that much money. So there's still a huge divide between, and that price point varies based on the designer and the company, where they determine it's worth it to make it repairable or recyclable instead of it being the user's problem.
Hey, before we get back into the show, I want to take this chance to introduce a sponsor of ours. If you've been following along, you know that I'm a big advocate that our homes should be places of safety and a haven from the dangers of the world. But toxic chemicals are everywhere, especially in our homes. It's the paint on our walls, the floors beneath our feet, and even the tables we gather around can contain chemicals that pose serious health risks, such as cancer and infertility. The EPA acknowledges that indoor air quality is 3 to 5 times worse than outdoor air, which not only affects our health, but also our productivity. I try to do the best I can to make healthy choices, but even as a real estate professional dedicated to healthy and resilient spaces, there's just so much more to know. That's why I was so happy to get introduced to the work of Wise Matter. Wise Matter helps homeowners, architects, designers, and contractors choose eco-conscious building materials, finishes, and even furniture that support optimal indoor air quality. Style does not have to be sacrificed when making these important decisions, and Wise Matter will work with you to find healthy finishes that achieve the aesthetic you desire. After all, you can't call something good design if it undermines your health or that of the planet. Wise Matter offers a free 30-minute consultation to discuss your home or project design. You can visit them at wise-matter.com. Yeah, it's interesting because it almost sounds like there is a point where it goes from one industry to the next. Like a car, if it's not repairable, it's now garbage, and it's got to go
Right.
somewhere else, and another industry picks it up there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you go back to like a soda company that they have all these plastic bottles that they put out into the world, billions of them that are going to biodegrade over thousands of years. Like, do you see, and this is just like complete personal opinion, but do you think that that is a company's responsibility to think about those externalities? Because that is a design um, problem that like it originated at the design,
I
or is
mean,
that
my personal is it's the designer's problem. And we, as an industrial designer, I went to school for design. We're responsible for coming up with the product, right? And if you don't, if the designer doesn't think about the life cycle, no one else is going to. It's not, and it's not possible for an individual consumer. If you get a plastic bottle, what are you going to do with it? It's not like you run, unless every individual person runs a small tiny injection molding shop and they can take take that plastic and recycle it. It's just not something that an individual could possibly deal with unless it's designed to be that. If you designed it so that an individual could easily pop apart four different components and put them in recycling, and the recycling company can easily take care of it because they're already it's taken apart, there's no plastic bonded to metal, it's easy for them. You would have to design that, though. Like, that's not on the consumer to figure out what to do with it. And so I think there's a lot of responsibility. There is, some responsibility on the consumer. Like, you shouldn't take it and toss it into the ocean, but if they don't have a place to put it that it can be taken care of, that's also not their responsibility to build a factory to disassemble and correctly deal with the trash that is produced from a product that they purchase that stops working. So I think it's a balance of responsibility, but I definitely lay the lion's share on the designer and the company who's developing it to think about, well, what happens when this product is done? What does the user do with it? And it can be as simple as, well, we have an option to take things back. We can take it back because we can disassemble it and reuse our raw materials. And there's programs like batteries. Home I think it's Home Depots and places like that sell the batteries for power tools are legally required to have a collection, or the battery manufacturers legally required to have a collection where people can put those batteries back, because there's no way as an individual consumer I would ever be able to safely disassemble a lithium battery and separate the materials without causing a small amount of toxic hazardous waste in my lawn. Like, there's just no way for me to do it because I don't have that equipment. So I think that's where there's kind of that divide too, of like, well, if it's something you can unscrew or you can easily clip apart, great. The consumer can clip it apart and put in recycling, or the recycling company can pop it apart and it's done. Like, that's one level, but there's so many products that are not that, and we would still have to design it that way. It's not if you don't design it that way, the consumer is not going to redesign it for you because you've already made it.
so let's switch over to how this applies to the built environment. Do you think that the same principles should apply towards our buildings and the materials that are going into them?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's the same thing as a designer creates a design, somebody builds it, somebody selects the materials, and unless you're building a custom home or you're building a custom thing that you have complete control over, then, and in that case, you are the designer because you're telling the designer, I want it to be sustainable. I want it to be regenerative. I want you to put in solar panels, and I want you to put all these features in. So in a way, you're taking over the designer role because you're saying, well, I'm paying, you're gonna you're gonna do it the way I want it to, go figure it out. um, and then it again, it trickles down to the designer to actually figure out how to make that actually happen. And I think the built environment is the same. I've talked to people about this, and there's a lot of, well, we just designed it this way because we have, or this, the layout for a house. I don't think the layout for a house has changed really in 100 years. There's not really a lot of um, change or development, and there are some great architecture out there that they do look at, how do you align the house with the sun to reduce costs. I've talked to people that they're able to do passive solar homes, and not solar power, they literally just have it so that they look at the direction of the wind. Typically they look at the sun, they look at the pattern, and they build and arrange the house so that you basically don't have to have heating and cooling in it, like very minimal, right? Unless there's an extreme uh, temperature change, and that's, it just takes thinking about it and planning ahead, instead of going, well, I got 10 acres here, I'm going to chop it up into the same three cookie cutter houses and put them 3 feet from each other, and there you go, I have a neighborhood, I'm going to sell them off. It takes a little bit more thinking, and so that, I think, is a responsibility partly of, the builder and the designers, but I think it's also, right now there's not as much drive from the consumer side either, of, we want more of this. And it's, I think it's also kind of chicken and egg, right? You have to have a demand in order to do it, but if you don't do it at all, no one knows it exists, so how can they want something they don't know it doesn't exist? So it's, I would say that it's probably something that people need to start making some different options and look at, well, here's a house that we designed this way, here's a house that we designed this way, this one's more efficient, because people are looking at that more and more, right? There are trends of, solar panels on roofs, right? That's a thing people are looking for. So then that's the question of, well, why don't we just build the house with it, or just come with it, because it's easy to install when you're up there already. So why don't we just build it in? And that switch hasn't happened yet, though. I'm not sure why, but it hasn't.
Before we get back into this episode, I want to do a quick interruption to highlight the work that makes this podcast possible. The heartbeat of regenerative real estate is the incredible people that are focused on redefining our culture's relationship to place. From Latitude's growing ecosystem of mission-aligned businesses and organizations, to our community of real estate professionals that are best described as change agents, the work we are doing at Latitude is focused on transforming the built and natural environments so that people and planet can thrive together. Here's a short message from Latitude change agent Azumi Tanaka out of Southern California.
I was trying so hard to build my real estate business as a green real estate expert for a couple of years. And I remember the first meeting I came to Latitude, Daniel was talking about how he's been banging his head on the wall. And I just said, it's exactly how I felt. But the first aha moment was the moment I saw the website. That was the aha moment. And then from that point on, it's like, because what I saw was, this is exactly what I've been trying to build, wanting to build by myself. And there's a whole group of people who are trying to do the same thing. And I was like, I'm in. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind in that first moment.
And this is the conversation that we really like to explore with this show and with our work at Latitude, is that our environment, especially the built environment, is so complex that and immutable, in the sense that you build something and it's going to be there for the next several decades, hopefully more. And the way that we were thinking about materials and design in the early 20th century is completely different than it is now. I mean, different technology, but also look at the use of asbestos in a lot of things. And just there, like, even today, I don't think that we've gotten tremendously better, at least in the US, where there's 35,000 chemical compounds that is banned in Europe, but is perfectly fine to use in building materials here. And we know that they're environmentally harmful. We know that they're impacting our health and our well-being. So like how do we start shifting the conversation to increase the demand for healthier homes and healthier environments that are more energy efficient, more community oriented, and like integrates in with ecology? Because I think that we just we're living in this holdover of like such poor design thinking, and it's having such disastrous impacts on our health. It's hard to see the ambivalence on people, or just like the unawareness whenever, I think if you really tune into what's going on, that it's all around us.
Well, I think it's one of those things that, nobody likes change, except for the oddball out there who's figured out how to like it. Naturally we don't like change, and so if something works and any consequences are in the back, they're behind the curtain, then it's really easy to just keep moving forward. And I think it's also the same as on the product side, is there's not as much awareness from build, just like your average builder who's constructing, unless they know about these materials, unless they know about our alternatives and they're priced similarly, then is not really, it's hard to get people to shift over, because
Do you think they have
it's
to be priced similarly? I mean, like we're taking products to buildings, so I don't know if there's a lot of overlap. But if people are willing to pay more for a product, or that's what you're saying, like
yeah.
there's a
Well,
demand
by
with price
similarly,
inelasticity.
I mean within 20%. It can't be,
Hmm.
if your house is double the cost, that's really hard. That's hard to do. Um, so I think and I think there are options. And like I said, I'm working with a startup. We're working on lumber, and so there's a lot of alternative materials that are better for the environment when they're being created, whether it's grown or manufactured. There are alternatives, and there's enough of them in a close enough price point that I think a shift is possible. It's just nobody seems to be doing it. Like nobody seems to be jumping over as much, right? A lot of cheap materials are still used, or like you said, 35,000 different materials that we've identified as a problem, that we keep using. It's, I think that there could be a demand there. I just don't think I just haven't seen anybody really jumping over and saying, well, I'm going to build an entire neighborhood this way and see what happens, and try to sell it. So
They're out
maybe
there.
somebody listening wants to jump on and and do that, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of material options. There's a lot of technology out there to make homes more efficient, to have, solar panels, wind power. There's so much you can do with a house now that, yeah, 1920 we did not think about. It was not possible, right? Not even within the realm of dreaming about, was it an option to do that we can now. And it's just, I think it's helping. Somebody needs to go first and say, here's a house, we built it, we built 30 of them, this is how efficient they are, this is how much. And with those kind of things, like efficiency and reducing, if you can reduce the amount of time your AC and heater is on, reduce your power consumption from the grid. And those are all, with, I feel like with a house, you have a unique position, or any other structure, you have the unique position of long term saving you money. So even if it does cost more up front, you can actually end up saving more money long run because of how you build it. Whereas, with a lot of products, that's not the same, right? So most products don't come with a giant water bill with it every single month, or a big electric bill. So I think it's a unique opportunity, and yeah, I don't know anybody jumping on it.
Oh, well, yeah, and that's where that is the purpose of the show, and that is really the purpose of our work. And there's so many amazing like little nuggets that I wanted to pick up on, and maybe this is just to highlight the frustration that I've had from the complexity of all this, because you also have to throw in financing into all of it. Like, if we have sold houses that they are better for the environment, they're better for the inhabitant, they are cheaper to run operationally, um, and they're truly amazing. And the owners have put a lot of money and energy and time into enhancing, like a 1924 bungalow, and they want to get a return on their investment, and it's going to cost more than the other 1924 bungalow that is next door. But whenever you're bringing in financing, and an appraiser comes out and says, well, you've got 3 bedrooms and 2 baths in this house, and the one that sold down the street had 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, it was similar square footage, both seemed to be pretty nice, but you're trying to sell yours for $150,000 more, we can appraise it at that. And so automatically it's a
Mm.
huge disincentive to actually invest into your property. And so we've got this whole mess with the financial regulation side of things. And it's not as easy. Like a lot of people in the real estate industry, and maybe I'm just talking more towards the listeners right now, because a lot of people say, well, we just need more green appraisers. Well, their hands are tied, that it doesn't matter if they have the industry knowledge about why it's a better property. They literally cannot appraise it like that.
Right.
And
There's rules.
yeah,
There's rules in place they got to follow.
there are rules, and we need to start really examining those rules. But you made a great point about, a house, this product, because a house is a product, it comes along with a really big water bill. And oftentimes I can't even begin to tell you, I if I'm going to just guess off the top of my head, I'd say about 95% of people never ask what the operational cost of a property is.
I mean,
No idea.
I've never, in any, like, oh, we're buying a house or conversation with people, I don't think I've ever, everyone focused, well, the mortgage is going to be this.
Right.
And like,
Yeah.
you've been thinking about, like, the taxes or insurance is even a secondary lower tier. And then, yeah, the operational expense is just not, I've never heard it. So if you being in real estate, if you've never, if you don't really have that question, that really means that no one's really thinking about that, which is crazy. Now that you you said that out loud, to think about, no one's, because even, I mean, anything else with a monthly bill, you ask about, and you go, well,
Right.
this is great. It's going to cost this much down, but what's the actual total monthly expenditure to run this? That'd be like not asking what the mileage per gallon would be on a car before you buy it. Just doesn't matter. We'll find out. We'll find out when I have to go to the gas station. And
Totally. And here's the commonalities that I like. I see the product world that you're talking about, and I just see so much similarities. And how do we start drawing upon the same kind of design philosophy? Because it, it follows the same principles of the materials are coming from somewhere. We're marketing them towards a certain demographic of people that are then going to buy it, and they're going to use it, and then it's going to end its life cycle. So what happens to it? And hopefully the product is life-giving, and it doesn't like come at the expense of the environment and our health and all that. Same with our buildings and our homes and habitats in general. So yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting conversation, and I wanted it to go in this direction, but I was like, okay, how are we going to get here? And I think where we can go from here, Ian, is just what's really exciting for you right now? Like what gets you jazzed about the work that you're doing?
I mean, it's really seeing. One is I talk to a bunch of people with different ideas, so it's seeing, what are people coming up with, what are, new startups going, we want to solve this problem and this is how we want to solve it. And it's exciting because I get to see kind of behind the scenes from an average, person who doesn't live in this world. Is I get to see all those interesting ideas, and I get excited when they actually make sense and they are possible. And it's really exciting to see that there's still more and more new materials. And getting involved with the hemp startup Odin Materials, beginning to understand that my understanding of what we could possibly do with just that one material is very small compared to what it can be done. And so it's it's really exciting to be able to be in a place where I'm constantly being reminded that there's more opportunity, there's more options, there's more ideas than we could have thought of, that anybody would think that we would have, right? And that it's real. And so it's exciting to be able to work with those companies and say, all right, we're going to help you make this happen. We're going to help you become more green. We're going to help you be more environmentally friendly. We're going to help you, design in a conscious way, think about the impact of your products. And it's exciting because people are also a lot more open. They're coming into a lot more startups and companies that we talk with. They see what we're doing, they see what we're talking about, and so they are interested in, how can we make this better? How do we make this? What are our packaging options? How do we reduce the plastic in it? Or, we have to make it out of plastic because there's no other way to make the product work, but the product is going to make this change over here, and we still want to reduce. We want to still figure out ways to go, reduce it as much as possible, and still have a product. And so those conversations it's exciting to see people actually wanting to do it, and being able to help them and see projects come out that are that are actually thinking about these things. So it is definitely exciting. I love my job, so.
But that gives me tremendous hope that we all have roles to play, that there is still such amazing generative work out there to create and design, and hopefully we start teaching more circularity in our schools and for our kids and trades and all that. Well, Ian, I know that you've got a book and a podcast, which is how I found you. I'd love to steer people in those directions, because I think that a lot of people would really be interested in this conversation around conscious design. Um, it both have that title. Am I wrong?
You are correct. They are both conscious design, and then the conscious design podcast. So yeah,
Ride that train.
it's good. It's been great. People read it and then they hear a little bit about it, and it aligns with people. So it seems to be the right name. It's
You've
sticking.
co-authored. You had a co-author on the book, and that was your wife, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
How did that duo come together? And we don't have to go back to how you met, but like how are you working together?
Yeah, so she works with me in the design firm, and her main background is in traditional medicine from India, China, and so her background is much more this integrative, natural based, and so she had a lot of insight into, how how to apply that when thinking about design and thinking about going about how do you consciously think through things, because it's just a going through those schools of thought is just such a different way from how we think today. And so she is able to kind of ask questions, well, what do you think about this, how do you think through this? And so that's how we created, and in the book we talk about, you know, conscious design, and then one of the topics we bring about as well is legacy branding and the longevity of your brand and the impact that your brand has. And that's, you know, when you studying those different medicines, a lot of it's a long-term impact. Like they're very ancient, right? So there's a lot of long-term thinking and that you can actually read through. And so that helped us, you know, really think about, well, what has made those successful, what anything that's really old, that's still operating, that's still being thought about or used, like what about them, besides if they work, right? You know, obviously they both hopefully work if they're still being used, but what else really it goes into it, that was either done consciously or unconsciously by whoever created it and curated it. And so that's something that we wove into. If you're going to be conscious about design, then you should be conscious about the legacy that you're leaving and what you're building to last. And there's a I wouldn't say a huge shift at this point, but there's beginning to be some more focus on not just a grow and dump format for new startups, right? There's companies are starting to look at, well, what's the longevity of your business? Are you going to be around in 5 years? Or are you going to sell your company in 2 and we don't know what's going to happen? And so that's something that's part of conscious design we realized needed to be a part of it, is looking at long term. You need to be looking long term, and that long term thinking is also part of how you then go, oh, what I do today, you know, you might think about, oh, I'm going to make a million little widgets, and you know, in the next 5 years it may not be a big thing, but long term, what is the impact of this? Am I going to be remembered as a person who dumped a million widgets into the ocean, or am I going to be remembered as someone who made something that is important, or beneficial, or at least forgotten because it wasn't harmful? Like at the bare minimum, let's meet that. And so that sparked that conversation of how that portion of designing consciously is also designing long term and thinking about not just the now. It's what is your grandkids going to experience because of what you did. Hopefully it's good.
Yeah,
That's the goal.
what a nice harmony. Just because one is pulling from a transactional based design and another pulls from patterns of holism, and really seeing how it fits in with a greater purpose and the cycles of life. Well, Ian, this has been tremendous. I really applaud your work. I think that there's a lot of overlaps between what we're doing, and we'll continue to follow along. And for anybody listening, yeah, check out the Conscious Design podcast and the Conscious Design book. And is there, if people are interested in hiring your firm, where can they go?
Yeah, you can find us at petermanfirm.com. And you'll also find link to the podcast there, and our blog and everything, which is also the Conscious Design blog. So yeah, you can find us there, contact. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy, just Ian Peterman. And that's usually it. I'm in the top most of the time. So yeah, pretty easy to find.
Well, thanks so much, Ian. We appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Neil.
Okay, everyone, that is a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in to another great episode. If you're not already a subscriber, please do so wherever you get your podcast. You can create good karma by leaving a review on Apple Podcast or sharing this show with your friends. If you're looking for ways to get more involved in the regenerative real estate movement, then you are in luck. We have a Facebook community conveniently called Regenerative Real Estate that you can join and be a co-creator with us on this journey. If you have a business or organization that you feel is aligned with our mission to use real estate as the catalyst for a regenerative future and would like to work together, then please be sure to get in touch. We are building an ecosystem to help amplify your work and message, where you can present to our community or sponsor the work that we are doing. You can do this by reaching out to us at team@chooselatitude.com. Last, and certainly not least, this podcast is enabled by the people that buy and sell real estate with us through our network of Latitude regenerative change agents located across North America. Our goal is to help transform homes and habitats, person by person, property by property, and we do that by combining the skills of a real estate professional with sustainable and regenerative consultation. It is time that we all start to live our values, and we hope to work with you on your next real estate sale or purchase. Okay, that is all for now. In the words of Paul Hawkins, remember that we are either stealing our future or healing our future. We are hard at work trying to do the latter. So until next time, be well.